is the way.
This is the way.
Our honor, fortunes, and lives revolve around battle. From our earliest history, this has been our way, as it will be always. Our history and our ways are something we shield from outsiders.
Before Disney, George Lucas allowed many creatives, from writers to games and everything in between, tell their stories to add to the tapestry of Star Wars. While the Legends material is no longer canon, many elements from these have been brought into the main story of Star Wars. These stories became the expanded universe and is what we know today as Legends. So many of the stories from the past are still worth exploring. So let's dive back into the lore, the legends, and the canon that make up the history of the Mandalorians. Before we get into it, if you're a fan of our videos, please like our content and subscribe to the channel. It really does help us out and gives us the opportunity to create more content for you. Chapter 1, The Taung. Thousands of years before the Republic, before the helmets and the Beskar-infused armor, there were the Taung. On the core world of Notron, which was later called Coruscant, this ancient gray-skinned humanoid species were native to the planet and were warriors, trained from childhood. The Taung were extremely resilient and strong and able to endure great hardships that other species could not. It made them a formidable warrior race. Each and every member of their society was trained to be warriors. The Taung believed that they honored their gods through battle, and nothing was more honorable than to be a warrior. This warrior culture was the dominant species on the planet for centuries. 200,000 years before the Battle of the Yavin, the native Taung and the Zell, who were the ancestors of the modern humans, began to come into conflict with each other. The fighting lasted for centuries, and eventually the Taungs and their general, who was nicknamed Doom of Omura, took down the Zell's capital, Great Zell. Though the Taung were victorious, they had many casualties, including their general. The Zell fought back and the Taungs made their last stand in the city. The Zells were about to win, but a volcanic eruption took down most of the battalions of Zell and nearly brought them to extinction. The ash from the volcano blocked out the light from the sun, and Notron was in darkness for 2 years. During this time, the Taungs subjugated the remaining Zell. The Taungs viewed this natural disaster as a sign of their destiny to rule, and they took the name Da Werda Verda, which means Warriors of the Shadow in the Taung language. Now, the Taung's victory over the Zell ended up being short-lived, and eventually the Zell won back their control and drove the Taung off of their homeworld around 90,000 BBY. A people without a home, the Taungs fled to the planet Rune, where they lived for a millennia until a new leader arose, a Taung named Mandalore the First. And Mandalore the First and the Taung began roaming throughout the Outer Rim as nomads, and eventually conquered a new planet which they renamed after their leader, their new homeworld, Mandalore. The planet Mandalore had a multitude of dangerous creatures, one of which was the Mythosaur, which the Taung were able to eventually slay and drive to extinction. The Taungs recast themselves as the Mandalorians, and the Mythosaur's skull then became a symbol of the Mandalorians themselves. The first mask of Mandalore was worn by Mandalore the First. It was actually carved from the bone of a mythosaur's sternum and was modeled after the facial features of the Taung. This helm became a symbol of leadership to the Mandalorians, passed down to those worthy of the title Mandalore, the leader of the Mandalorian clans. Around 7,000 BBY, the Taung discovered a rare alloy on Mandalore. This was Beskar. Beskar was rare throughout the galaxy and only known to be present on Mandalore and its moon of Concordia. This Mandalorian iron became cherished by the Mandalorians because of its incredible strength and durability, which could even withstand blows from a lightsaber. Mandalorian metalsmiths used techniques to increase the strength of Beskar, and they could combine the Beskar with other alloys to shape it into various configurations for armor and weapons. With the discovery of this rare metal, the Taungs were able to expand and conquer other worlds in the Outer Rim. With honor being gained through battle, the Mandalorians branched out to conquer new worlds. After Mandalore the First came Mandalore the Indomitable. In 3,996 BBY, Mandalore the Indomitable pushed campaigns to invade the Titan space. There they encountered the Sith Lord Ulic Qel-Droma, who was leader of the Krath military. Mandalore the Indomitable ended up swearing an oath of allegiance to Qel-Droma and pledged the Mandalorians would fight alongside the Sith in their war against the Jedi. It was around this time that the Mandalorians began taking in other species into their culture, which transformed what it meant to be Mandalorian from a single species to a multi-species warrior culture. Mandalore the Indomitable wore a ceremonial war mask throughout the Great Sith War. The mask was golden with a T-shaped visor. After his death, it was found by his Taung successor, Mandalore the Ultimate. Mandalore the Ultimate led the Mandalorians on a campaign against the Galactic Republic. And then the Jedi Knight Revan and Mandalore the Ultimate faced off, and Revan ultimately was the victor and hid the mask from the Mandalorians, leaving them leaderless. The Taung race suffered major losses during this campaign, and by the end of the war were driven to extinction. But the Mandalorian culture survived even though the Taungs passed into history. The Taung and their history is a part of Legends material, so whether or not they are brought into canon remains to be seen. But in canon, in Chapter 8 of The Mandalorian, the Armorer does mention Mandalore the Great, who held the title of Mandalore and fought against the Jedi Order, and these battles were known to the Mandalorians through ancient songs. Mandalore the Great's title is very similar to Mandalore the Ultimate, and could be the same Taung leader from Legends. What they choose to bring from the Taung into canon will hopefully be explored in future Star Wars series and films. While the details might change, this Legends material gives us a backstory and a deeper understanding into how the Mandalorians came into being and how their warrior culture first developed.
You should have destroyed us when you had the chance. As long as one Mandalorian lives, we will survive. A lone Mandalorian is a small army. Clan Ordo alone is a force to be reckoned with. We will unite as before, and one day the banners of all Mandalorian clans will fly at my back.
Chapter 2: The Scattered Clans. After the Mandalorian Wars, where Mandalore the Ultimate was defeated, Revan took the Mask of Mandalore, which was passed down from leader to leader, and hid away. Without it, the Mandalorian clans could not declare a new leader, the remaining clans scattered throughout the galaxy. After their defeat, many Mandalorians became bounty hunters and mercenaries, while some even became gladiators. Now, we can't talk about the Mandalorians without talking about Revan. Revan was once a Jedi, and after the Mandalorian Wars, he turned to the dark side and became Darth Revan, alongside his apprentice Darth Malak. He upended the galaxy to try to find the ancient Cotton artifact, the Starforge. Many Mandalorians wanted to seek revenge against Revan, so they fought against the Sith during this time. Eventually, Revan was captured by the Jedi and they wiped his memories, so once again, Revan returned to the light side of the Force. After this, Revan met a mercenary named Canderous Ordo, who was once a Mandalorian crusader, and they worked together to stop Revan's old apprentice Darth Malak and his Sith Empire. Revan would eventually stop Malak and destroy the Starforge, ending the Dark Wars. After he had defeated his old apprentice, Revan believed the Truth Sith still remained in the unknown regions, and believed that they would be a future threat to the galaxy. At this time, he began to regain some of his old memories from the time that he was a Sith, and he gave the Mask of Mandalore to Canderous Ordo. Revan believed that the galaxy needed the Mandalorians to be united to fight against the future threat of the Sith, and believed Ordo should reunite the clans. After this, Revan disappeared into the unknown regions and Ordo became the new Mandalore, taking the name Mandalore the Preserver. Ordo set out to unite the clans, and along the way he encountered one of the last remaining Taungs in the galaxy. This unnamed Taung told Ordo that Mandalore the Ultimate was not the rightful Mandalore, and that he, the last Taung, was the rightful heir to Mandalore the Indomitable. But he was near death, so this last Taung gave his armor and his clan to Canderous Ordo, and asked him to carry on the traditions of the Mandalorians. Ordo took the armor and used the Mask of Mandalore and incorporated it into the Taung's helmet. He then went to an old outpost on Duxon and worked to rebuild the Mandalorians under Clan Ordo. In 3951 BBY, the Mandalorians would aid the Jedi and the Republic and fight against the Sith Dark Nihilus, defeating him alongside a Jedi exile named Mitra Surik, who had been a former Jedi general of Revan's. The legend story of Canderous Ordo seems very familiar to what they are telling with Din Djarin in The Mandalorian. He is a Mandalorian during a time when all the clans are scattered. He works alongside Jedi allies and will work to unite the Mandalorians. Even though Ordo tried to unite the clans, the Mandalorian clans remained fragmented for about 3 centuries. In 3661 BBY, Revan's prediction came true, and the reconstituted Sith Empire returned to the galaxy, and the Sith wanted the Mandalorians to aid them. They eventually propped up a Mandalorian gladiator on Geonosis to claim the title of Mandalore, and many Mandalorians would rally to this new leader, known later as Mandalore the Lesser. He was ultimately a puppet for the Sith Empire. This led to many battles between the Jedi and the Mandalorians. Now, Mandalore the Lesser wanted to solidify his support from the clans and called for a competition known as the Great Hunt. One Mandalorian warrior named Artus challenged the Mandalore and killed Mandalore the Lesser. Artus became the new leader and took the title Mandalore the Vindicated. Now, Mandalore the Vindicated would remain an ally of the Sith, but later died in battle against the Turtle Empire. Now, the Eternal Empire, also known as the Eternal Empire of Zakul, or the Zakul Empire, was a totalitarian dictatorship in the Outer Rim. It had an emperor named Valkorion, and Valkorion actually fought against both the Galactic Republic and the reconstituted Sith Empire. After Mandalore the Vindicated died, a bounty hunter named Shae Vizsla took the mantle and became Mandalore the Avenger and fought against the Eternal Empire. From 2000 BBY, the New Sith Wars, also known as the Jedi-Sith War, began and lasted for 1,000 years and ended when the Sith ultimately destroyed themselves as they fought each other for power. But Darth Bane survived and instituted the Rule of Two, ushering in a time of peace and prosperity for the Jedi and the Republic. At the end of the New Sith Wars around 1000 BBY, a mercenary named Aga Awad returned to Mandalore and found his clan was decimated by a plague and the entire sector was fighting against raiders and pirates. Aga rallied the Mandalorians to defend their homeworld and became Mandalore the Uniter and rebuilt Mandalorian space.
See, this is me, Boba Fett. This is my father, Jango Fett.
Your father was a foundling.
Yes. He even fought in the Mandalorian civil wars.
We know quite a bit about Boba Fett, but what about Jango Fett? Where does he come from? How did he get his armor? And why was he picked to be the clone template? Chapter 3, The Rise of Fett. In 738 BBY, Mandalore continued to grow its military presence, which became a growing concern for the Republic and the Jedi. And even though the Mandalorians were essential in fighting back both the Eternal Empire and the Sith, the Republic began a campaign against the Mandalorians and their homeworld. This conflict brought devastation to the Mandalore sector, and the planet Mandalore itself was reduced to mostly a white sanded desert. After this, many of the warrior clans scattered and a new faction of Mandalorians rose that did away with a warrior code and instead opted to be pacifists. These Mandalorians would be known as the New Mandalorians, and they became the central power on Mandalore. Unlike the Mandalorian culture passed down from the original Taung warriors, these new Mandalorians believed strongly in non-violence and neutrality, and those who refused to reform were banished to Mandalore's moon of Concordia. Only a few Mandalorians continued the ancient traditions, and they ended up calling themselves the Akalahi, which means faithful in Mandoa, the Mandalorian language. The title of Mandalore passed on to a member of the Akalait. In 200 BBY, the Mandalorian warrior clans were responsible for a genocide of the Uthulin race. Later on, in 60 BBY, a Mandalorian warrior named Jaster Muriel became the new Mandalore. Being a strong, ethical warrior, he decided to institute cultural reforms. He wanted to instill a code of honor because many Mandalorians were dissatisfied with the dishonorable and overly savage ways present in the current Mandalorian culture. Muriel wanted to restore and reinstitute the old warriors code that had been forgotten ages ago. Thereby, he created the Super Commando Codex, which was a guideline for Mandalorian behavior, and instilled that the Mandalorians should act as highly paid soldiers and honorable mercenaries. Now, some Mandalorians opposed these reforms and decided to follow the brutal leader Tor Vizsla, who wanted to conquer the galaxy. These Mandalorians banded together and called themselves Death Watch, and those who remained loyal to Jaster Muriel recast themselves as the true Mandalorians. Now, Mandalorians were split into three factions, with the pacifists, the new Mandalorians, the honorable warriors called the true Mandalorians, and the savage conquerors called Death Watch. This led to the Mandalorian Civil War. In 58 BBY, the Civil War came to the agricultural planet of Concord Dawn. On this planet lived a farmer and a journeyman protector, which was basically the local law enforcement, named Fett. During a major fight between the true Mandalorians and Death Watch, Jaster Muriel and his soldiers had to retreat, and Fett gave the group refuge. Death Watch found out about this, and Tor Vizsla brutally interrogated Fett in front of his young son, Jango. Before Vizsla could kill Fett, his wife opened fire on Death Watch, and while ultimately Fett and his wife ended up dying, young Jango was saved by Jaster Muriel, and the young boy showed the true Mandalorians a way to escape. These Mandalorians were able to regroup in a nearby town and ambush Death Watch, taking down every one of them aside from their leader Tor Vizsla, who managed to escape the planet. After this, Jango Fett was adopted by Jaster Muriel and then became a true Mandalorian himself. 6 years after this, in 52 BBY, the true Mandalorians contracted out a job on Corta 6 to help rescue a team of security personnel. The local Corta natives put up quite the battle, and the Mandalorians took heavy casualties. Muriel ended up ordering a retreat, but Montrose, his second in command, refused the order and fought on. Jango Fett was in charge of leading a team to rescue the security personnel and instead found Death Watch waiting to ambush them, and Mareel and Montrell were attacked directly by Tor Vizsla. Jaster Mareel was hit with a grenade, and Montrell abandoned his leader to die at the hands of their enemy. Montrose returned to the Mandalorians' landing zone and told the remaining Mandalorians that Mareel had died alongside Jango Fett, who tried to save him, and told the clan that Mareel's final order was to retreat and that he wanted Montrell to take command. Then, to the shock of Montrell, Jango Fett managed to return to the landing zone with Mareel's body, proving Montrell to be a liar and a traitor. The true Mandalorians renounced Montrell, and they made Jango Fett the next Mandalore, the leader of the true Mandalorians. After this, Fett proved to be an effective leader and led the true Mandalorians to multiple victories against Death Watch, leaving their rivals extremely crippled. But in 44 BBY, Tor Vizsla developed a plot with the governor of Galadran to take down his enemies. The governor contracted the true Mandalorians to put down a local insurrection, and under Jango Fett they put down the rebellion quickly. But instead of being paid for their job, the governor contacted the Jedi and claimed that the Mandalorians were murdering activists, including innocent women and children. Fett was attacked by Vizsla and Death Watch and had to flee, but on his way back to the base camp, the true Mandalorians encountered a Jedi strike team led by Jedi Master Dooku. In the ensuing shootout, 11 Jedi were taken down, 6 of which were taken down by Jango himself, something Dooku observed firsthand. Every true Mandalorian died except for Fett, who was then turned over to the governor and put into slavery. But Fett managed to escape after several years, and he recovered his armor from the governor of Galadran and managed to kill Tor Vizsla on Corellia, which dealt the final blow in the Mandalorian Civil War. After this, Death Watch scattered, and Fett decided to become a lone bounty hunter rather than continue on as Mandalore. After this, the new Mandalorians picked up the pieces and established their government under the leadership of Duchess Satine Kryze. The Mandalorians who were left that maintained the traditions of old but rejected Death Watch's ideals came to be known as the Old Mandalorians, and they left the Mandalore sector altogether. Then in 32 BBY, the now Count Dooku remembered a fearless Mandalorian who was able to take down a number of Jedi. And after becoming a Sith Lord, Darth Tyrannus decided to recruit the now bounty hunter named Jango Fett to be the template for a new clone army.
Have you ever heard of Bo-Katan Kryze?
Bo-Katan is a cautionary tale. She once laid claim to rule Mandalore based purely on blood and the sword you now possess. But it was gifted to her and not won by creed. Bo-Katan Kryze was born of a mighty house, but they lost sight of the way. Her rule ended in tragedy. They lost their way, and we lost our world.
Chapter 4: The Fall of the Mandalorians. Much of the history and canon for the Mandalorians is yet to be explored, but we see the pieces begin to fit together as shows like the Clone Wars, Rebels, and The Mandalorian give us bits of the canonical history. Now in canon, the armorer states that the Mandalorians have existed for 10,000 years.
All this talk of the Empire, and they lasted less than 30 years. Mandalorians have existed 10,000.
Mandalorians originated around 9,991 BBY, and, as in Legends, the Mandalorians' way of life revolved around honor and war, with various war clans united around a central leader called the Mandalore. Throughout the history, they came into conflict with the Jedi and the Galactic Republic, and the armor recalls Mandalore the Great, who had to lead the Mandalorians during these great wars. Despite their differences, their opposing cultural beliefs, there was once a Mandalorian Jedi. The Mandalorian was Tar Vizsla, who was inducted into the Jedi Order as a child and later created the Darksaber around 1058 BBY. The Darksaber was a wholly unique type of lightsaber. Like the Mandalorian Jedi himself, it brought together conflicting elements with both cultures. With a force-sensitive kyber crystal that produces an energy blade that can cut through most anything, and an indestructible hilt made out of Beskar, the Mandalorian's most prized metal, used for ancestral armor, a metal so strong it can deflect a lightsaber. With these sacred items from both the Jedi and the Mandalorians, he created the Darksaber, and later on Tar Vizsla founded House Vizsla and claimed the position of Mandalore, making the Darksaber a symbol of leadership for his house and the people of Mandalore. After his death, the Darksaber was kept in the Jedi Temple, but members of his house raided the Jedi Temple during the fall of the Old Republic and stole back the weapon, and with it, House Vizsla was able to unite the clans of Mandalore against the Jedi. Unfortunately, this war led to the destruction of Mandalore, which turned the planet's surface into a lifeless white desert. This is when the pacifist movement began, led by young Duchess Satine Kryze of House Kryze, and the new Mandalorians turned their back on the old ways. A Mandalorian civil war broke out between the new Mandalorians and the traditionalists. During the civil war, the Jedi became involved and protected Satine against bounty hunters who were hired to kill her, and and during this time, she met a young Jedi Padawan named Obi-Wan Kenobi, and both the Duchess and the Jedi grew fond of each other. Eventually, the Civil War ended and the Traditionalists were defeated by the new Mandalorians, who exiled the Traditionalists to Mandalore's moon of Concordia. One faction of these Traditionalists became Death Watch, and many other old Mandalorians scattered throughout the galaxy and became mercenaries. During the Clone Wars, those who followed the old ways would align themselves with both the Separatists and the Republic. One Mandalorian bounty hunter named Jango Fett was hired by Darth Tyrannus to become the clone template for the Republic, and his clones would be trained by Mandalorian protectors. Death Watch, led by Pre Vizsla, the descendant of Tar Vizsla, who carried his ancestral darksaber, would side with the Separatists in an effort to reclaim Mandalore from the pacifist Mandalorians. Later, Death Watch would join Maul in his criminal organization known as the Shadow Collective, and they brought down the new Mandalorians' control of Mandalore. At some point during this period, a young boy named Din Djarin would be rescued by Mandalorians wearing the symbol of Death Watch on their armor, and he would become a foundling in a sect of Mandalorians known as the Children of the Watch, who followed the Way of the Mandalore. The Way of the Mandalore, also known as Way of the Mandalore, was a religion followed by Orthodox Mandalorians. It involved protecting fellow Mandalorians and taking in foundlings, but also wearing a helmet at all times. The Children of the Watch were the Mandalorian group described by Bo-Katan Kryze as a cult, who followed the Way and sought to re-establish the religion, which had since fallen out of mainstream Mandalorian society and became considered ancient by the time of the New Republic era. As Death Watch and the criminal syndicate known as Shadow Collective worked together, Pre Vizsla challenged Maul to a duel and was killed by the once Sith Lord, who now claimed the darksaber as his own, making him the leader of the Mandalorians, which split the Mandalorians and led to another Mandalorian civil war, with those loyal to Maul and those who resisted, such as Bo-Katan Kryze, Duchess Satine's sister, who was supported by the Republic. Wanting revenge against Obi-Wan Kenobi, Maul would lead him to Mandalore and kill Duchess Satine in front of him with the darksaber. Seeing his old apprentice grow in power and strength, Darth Sidious came to Mandalore to put down the potential threat. Maul was defeated and his brother Savage Opress was killed, and while Sidious could have claimed the darksaber, the ancient weapon was left behind, recovered by Mandalorians loyal to Maul, and returned to him later. The Siege of Mandalore saw Bo-Katan, Ahsoka, and the Republic fight against Maul and his followers, leading to the Republic winning the Civil War and capturing Maul. Then, after Order 66, Maul managed to escape once again, and the Republic became the Galactic Empire. After the rise of the Empire, Bo-Katan Kryze was made regent of Mandalore, but she refused to follow the Emperor and was replaced by Gar Saxon, who was previously a Mandalorian loyal to Maul. Saxon was made viceroy over Mandalore. During this time in Rebels, Sabine Wren finds the darksaber on Dathomir, where Maul kept it, and gives it to the Jedi Canon, who eventually trained Sabine to use the weapon. Mandalore, like many planets, was oppressed under the Empire, and the Mandalorian resistance rose up and allied themselves with the Alliance to restore the Republic, better known as the Rebel Alliance. Sabine eventually fights the Viceroy Gar Saxon and rightfully earns the darksaber in battle. Sabine Wren's mother Ursa Wren told her that anyone can hold the darksaber, the trick is keeping it along with your head. Sabine chooses to give the ancient weapon and symbol of leadership to Bo-Katan Kryze to unite the clans against the Empire. We know from the Mandalorian that the darksaber can only be won in battle, and if not rightfully won, it will bring a curse down on all of Mandalore.
Bo-Katan is a cautionary tale. She once laid claim to rule Mandalore based purely on blood and the sword you now possess. But it was gifted to her and not won by creed.
Even though Sabine Wren knew this, she still decided to give the darksaber to Bo-Katan. Bo-Katan accepts the darksaber and assumes the position of Mandalore. Her reign as the leader of Mandalore would be short as the Empire began the Great Purge of Mandalore. Knowing that the Mandalorians would remain a threat and hard to control, they killed millions of Mandalorians during the Night of 1,000 Tears. During the Purge, Bo-Katan managed to escape from Mandalore but lost the darksaber. Eventually it would be found by Moff Gideon. With Mandalore decimated, few Mandalorians survived, and the Children of the Watch survived on the moon of Concordia. Their tribe decided to go into hiding and would eventually find a home on Navarro, living underground and enforcing a rule that only one Mandalorian could leave the covert at one time. The tribe concentrated on building up their ranks through foundlings, adopting children and instructing them in the way of the Mandalore. After the fall of the Empire, Din Djarin takes a certain bounty and finds Grogu, leading to the events seen in The Mandalorian. He eventually fights off Moff Gideon and rightfully wins the darksaber, and defends that right later against another descendant of Tar Vizsla, Paz Vizsla. Din Djarin ends up breaking the creed by removing his helmet, and the armor tells him that he's no longer a Mandalorian. But Din finds out he can atone by finding the living waters under the mines of Mandalore. This brings us to the present time frame in The Mandalorian Season 3, and it will certainly bring us more insight into the history of the Mandalorians in canon. Looking forward, we could see a lot of Legends material develop that could fit into this time frame. In Legends, in the year 29 ABY, a battle was fought on Mandalore between the Yuuzhan Vong and the Mandalorians. The Mandalorian leader, Boba Fett, initially aligned with the Yuuzhan Vong to spare the planet from invasion, but Fett would pass information to the New Republic. The Yuuzhan Vong eventually found out and led an assault on Mandalore. The Mandalorians fought against thousands of Yuuzhan Vong warriors, and with heavy casualties, the Mandalorians were able to drive the Yuuzhan Vong off of their world. Could this story be developed in The Mandalorian? Could we be seeing the Yuuzhan Vong soon, or even the Grisk? This would give us a new threat in the galaxy and give Din Djarin and the Mandalorians a reason to band together, either in Season 3 or beyond. Whatever the future might hold, the rich history and lore, legends, and canon gives us a fascinating culture to explore in the Star Wars universe, one that is worth exploring more. So thank you for taking this journey into the lore, legends, and canon with me that make up the history of the Mandalorian. I hope you're able to gain some new insights from this series, and it helps you enjoy The Mandalorian Season 3 even more. So thanks for joining me today on Fatherly Fandom, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And from our families to yours, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.